Our planet and solar system is going through a change far more profound than most people could ever imagine. Not only are extraterrestrials very real, both the positive and negative groups are far more involved in our own lives than most of us could ever realize. Although many people now discount the classic spiritual teachings that we have received over the millennia, it turns out that nothing could be of greater significance for us to study and practice. I performed 20 years of service in the secret space program, which is still unknown to most people. And yet, more and more insiders are now emerging, such as aerospace engineer William Tompkins, who can independently validate many aspects of my testimony. Tompkins can be seen on Cosmic Disclosure, a weekly show on Gaia that has helped me share this message with a large audience now exceeding the TV viewership numbers of CNN. Real-world data is also increasingly supporting the things I have seen and heard. David Wilcock, who interviews me on Cosmic Disclosure, published a comprehensive overview of this case, and its provable evidence, as of June 19. The final update section of the article emerged just minutes before he flew out to Colorado for another round of Cosmic Disclosure tapings, and is required reading for anyone who is following this story. The provable evidence included multiple, widespread reports of very bizarre meteor sightings. NASA tried to claim that a wild, streaking pattern that appeared in the sky over Phoenix on June 2 was the work of an asteroid. These types of events are of deep concern to the insider world, as there is fear that a hyper-advanced craft could crash in a populated urban area. My intel had indicated that a war is taking place between positive and negative extraterrestrials and other Earth-based groups, and that shootdowns were going to be increasingly common. These would lead to visible phenomena. This intel was almost immediately validated by the events outlined in David's article. The key players in our story include the Cabal, a group many people call the New World Order. Unbeknownst to most people, the Cabal is being very effectively opposed by a group of alliances, both on Earth and in the secret space program. Their financial and political control of our planet is being systematically overthrown. The Earth Alliance groups include a significant percentage of the U.S. defense and intelligence community who are fighting for the good. This includes a wide variety of computer hacks that are already exposing hidden truths. We are also hearing that massive data dumps could occur in the future that will expose the public to full disclosure, including the wrongdoings of the Cabal and the truth of the secret space program. Ultimately, the Cabal was created and run by negative extraterrestrials, including a reptilian group known as the Draco. The humans in the Cabal are not shape-shifting reptilians, as biological life does not have this ability. However, certain Cabal members do have telepathic connections to these beings that some intuitives will see as a reptilian overlay on their faces. This accounts for the many cases David Icke has reported on in his earlier works. The Draco are a conquering race, and Tompkins' new testimony revealed that they contacted the Nazis not just to hopefully subdue the Earth, but to create an army that could be used to conquer many other worlds as well. The Nazis had the mentality and industrial know-how that the Draco wanted, and began colonizing space with the technology the Draco gave them in the late 1930s. The United States was developing its own space program due to assets it had acquired, but did not succeed to anywhere near the degree that the Germans had. Ultimately, the US was bullied and blackmailed into joining the German SSP, and their hope was that they would be able to take the program over and squash the Germans. Unfortunately, the opposite took place, at least for many years. The level of technology in the SSP dwarfs anything we have on Earth, and includes replicator devices, teleportation, time travel, anti-gravity, free energy and healing technologies that make all forms of disease, illness, and even aging obsolete. These technologies would transform our society into a true Star Trek age overnight. These assets already exist in our skies, and we simply are not being allowed to see or use them, thanks to the Cabal and their overlords. However, an ever-increasing column of resistance has developed in the SSP that we are calling the SSP Alliance. Though my formal work in the SSP finished in 1987, I was recently contacted by a new group of powerful extraterrestrials, and this led to me being brought back in upon their own direct request. This new group was originally called the Sphere Beings, since they arrived in a magnificent array of gigantic spheres, some of which were as large as the planet Neptune in diameter. Although the first sphere appeared in the 1980s, they didn't begin showing up in larger numbers until the late 1990s. Another major influx appeared right around the Mayan calendar end date of 2012. The spheres refused to communicate with the SSP or the SSP Alliance in any way, causing great concern and mystery. I began working closely with David Wilcock as of October 2014, after our original written contact had started 5 years earlier. Although David was initially skeptical about my experiences and claims, he soon realized I was validating dozens and dozens of specific data points he had heard from other insiders. I was also quite astonished at how much he knew and had not publicly revealed about the SSP. This information was being held back so he could find out who was real and who was a fraud. David meticulously wrote down everything I said in real time as I was speaking, which grew into a 150-page, single-spaced document by late February 2015. We are now beginning the process of turning this into a published book and will update you as it progresses. David was also sharing the contents of this document with key people at the Gaia television network who had earned his trust. David gave an initial leak of the data I was giving him, along with data from others, at his Conscious Life Expo talk that same February. This created quite a stir in the insider world and led to me being threatened, though I had not given him most of the intel he shared. You can see me in the audience in the video footage that David just post-produced and released on August 2, 2016 as the Ascension Mysteries. Contrary to certain comments that have appeared online, I was still completely anonymous to everyone but David at the time of this taping. Shortly after we went public with this information, the Sphere Beings finally communicated with the SSP Alliance. They asked for me by name. I was brought up at the beginning of March 2015 and introduced to key people in the Alliance through my contact Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, who the Sphere Beings had also been in touch with. The beings who facilitated this meeting had already contacted me in the past. They were human-like but also possessed bird-like features, including blue and purple feathers, and thus were called the Blue Avians. The two beings I had the greatest interaction with called themselves Ra Tiri-ir and Ra Rain-ir. The first word Ra was pronounced almost like the word Ra. The Blue Avians refused to communicate directly with the Alliance, but ended up using me as their messenger in this first meeting. They stood behind me, along with another type of being we simply call the golden triangle-headed beings, and communicated answers to the Alliance's questions by speaking directly into my mind. I then reported the answers as meticulously as possible. This was a great surprise, and was only the first of many meetings that followed. I became a vessel of communication for the SSP Alliance and their planet-healing efforts to become widely known to humanity. This effort was greatly assisted with David's cooperation, and even more so when Gaia decided to create an entire television series around these events entitled Cosmic Disclosure. In September 2015, not long after Cosmic Disclosure began airing on a weekly basis, I was introduced to another alliance, this time a group of intelligent civilizations living inside the Earth. This is not the hollow Earth by any means. There are honeycomb-like pockets beneath the Earth's surface that can be transformed into habitable regions with sufficiently advanced technology. These areas are already widely inhabited by civilizations that are significantly more developed than our own. Although I had heard about inner Earth civilizations in the SSP, the scope of what I witnessed was quite surprising. A group calling themselves the Anchar were directly involved in humanity's spiritual evolution. They did look similar to Nordic-type humans on Earth, although their hair was white and their eyes were slightly larger. I was introduced to a high priestess of the Anchar who called herself Kari, and experienced what could only be described as a mind meld. This event had a lasting impact on me, including the fact that I almost immediately began eating a much healthier diet and have since lost enough weight that my appearance has noticeably changed. The overall message from the Anchar mirrors that of the Blue Avians, namely that our planet and solar system is about to undergo a dramatic energetic shift, which is tantamount to a massive spiritual transformation for everyone. The more loving, helpful, kind, and compassionate we are, the more we will benefit from this change, as it ultimately is a type of spiritual graduation. We will gain new abilities much like the great masters we read about in spiritual texts. Negative forces are allowed to offer temptations and thought forms to us whenever and wherever we invite them to. This is part of the cosmic law of free will that the universe is governed by. These negative beings ultimately feed on our fear, anger, and sadness, which is often called lush and literally acts as an energetic food source for them. Many of the seemingly inexplicable and self-destructive acts of the Cabal make more sense once you understand that the Draco are using planets like ours for fear farming. A planet with a smaller population that is much more tightly controlled would create a greater overall amount of lush for the Draco than what we have now. Hence we see their ongoing efforts to push for depopulation, the killing of billions of people as well as a new world order. Much of this cosmic battle is well explained in the Law of One series, which is a group of 106 question and answer sessions between a PhD physicist and an alleged extraterrestrial intelligence calling itself RA. I was notified about this series while I was in the SSP, and given propaganda about it suggesting that it was negative. David Wilcock had already been studying and teaching the Law of One material for nearly 20 years when I began telling him everything I know. The Blue Avians asked me to read the Law of One material soon after they contacted me. When the SSP Alliance got the chance to talk to them, one of the first questions they asked was, "Are you the RA from the Law of One series?" Their only answer was to respond, "I am RA," just like how the source introduces itself at the beginning of each answer they give in the Law of One dialogues. When David Wilcock asked if this group was the RA of the Law of One series, he heard 3 words very clearly in his mind: "Go outside now." He walked out his front door and saw a huge rainbow, which provided indirect but compelling validation that this was indeed who we were dealing with. David and I also discussed this at a restaurant while we were taping, and upon leaving the restaurant we both saw a rainbow. The law of free will allows the negative to create disruptive and upsetting events to whatever degree it can. The toll on my family and on myself has been very great. The beings explain that I will only experience what I have authorized, and therefore these events could be avoided almost entirely if I were able to consistently follow and support their message. This is far more difficult than it sounds, as we are constantly challenged by things that invite us into the negative emotions. In doing this work, those challenges increase dramatically. David gave the most current intel that was available at the time in his June 19 article. It included the sad story of Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, my main contact in the Secret Space Program, SSP, Alliance, having turned on me. This occurred after a lower-level SSP group had captured me and used advanced technology to out 3 Alliance members I knew. They showed me a series of pictures on something akin to an iPad, and my subconscious recognition of people I had seen before registered on the device. This compromised Gonzalez and forced him to go into hiding. I then went through an extremely dark phase where I was repeatedly abducted and interrogated, in a torture-style fashion, by a specialist in the SSP Alliance whose job was to mobilize underperforming assets. I had become burned out and was not doing anywhere near as much as the Alliance had hoped or expected that I would, and they had similarly negative sentiments about David. The human tolls of this work on a day-by-day basis have been extremely difficult, and there do appear to be spiritual influences intended to distract, frustrate, delay and otherwise interrupt our abilities to move forward and share this message. The SSP specialist, who called himself the Wrangler, assigned to me did not care about the excuses. They see very powerful changes taking place on Earth that could lead to a full disclosure event in our near future. This is not something that happens as if by magic. We have to fight for it, and the negative forces stand to lose everything if this quest succeeds. The Wrangler had offered me a job doing what Gonzalez had been doing. I would have been paid and would have had much higher level access, but I also would have had to keep my actions entirely secret. Once I decided I would not take the job, I was spared from any further interactions with this man. Had I gone up there, it is very likely that I would have been tortured even worse than before. David's article went up immediately before we started taping again in Boulder, Colorado, and was the most recent briefing of a thorough nature that I have offered. We recorded episodes describing these updates that have already aired on Cosmic Disclosure. What you are about to read now is a written account of what has happened to me since the events on those programs. Not long after returning home from Boulder, Colorado, I was contacted by Kari via the Anchar Etheric conference call method. She was reporting on a couple of recent meetings that she had attended, including one with a couple of SSP Alliance representatives. In these briefings she learned that our recent reconnaissance flight into the icy caverns of Antarctica had highly disturbed the individuals who are responsible for security at these installations. They were most shocked that their advanced technology did not detect the presence of the Anchar bus craft. This not only had a psychological impact on those who work at these facilities, but it was communicated to me that specific areas under the ice were made public. These are ancient sites that are fairly significant on a number of levels. I later found out that the remains of an ancient civilization were being excavated. They are cataloging artifacts, technology, and have found some interesting remains of the inhabitants. The reports that provided the intelligence to a specific group in the Alliance were too late to be used as actionable intel. At the time the briefing was originally delivered, a faction of the Alliance was already positioned and running an operation in the Antarctic region. Kari was warned by SSP Alliance representatives that the Wrangler had not only declared an interest in getting back at me, he had already reached out to a few contacts to see what sort of access they could provide him to me. I didn't understand why this was so personal for the Wrangler. It was communicated to me that this individual was in a highly triggered state and that he was being closely looked after. I asked if there was anything to report on Gonzalez. I learned that he was under the care of the ancient breakaway Mayan group. The etheric conference call was then terminated a short time later, after Kari and I conversed on a few personal items. Over the following weeks I was contacted by Kari for short exchanges, with very little information from her meetings with the SSP Alliance trickling down to me. I was feeling very disconnected and not really of any use. I asked Kari why she was still communicating with me when I had so very little to offer recently. She smiled at me and stated that I still had a role to play in future events. She communicated that after our mind meld, we had become connected in a way that would have her looking in on me for the rest of my life. I remembered a communication with Ratir EIR where I was told that as the cosmic energies increased, the spheres would begin to fade out of our soul system. At that time, there would be two other races that would then come and work more closely with humanity as they make the transition. Kari picked up on what I was thinking about, and interjected, "You and I will be in contact far after the Guardians go out of phase." On July 10 at 3:40 in the morning, I was awoken by a familiar blue light bleeding through my eyelids. I opened my eyes to see a blue orb in the room doing its typical zigzag dance along the ceiling while waiting for me to respond. I got up, put on what clothes I could and indicated I was ready for transport. I had no idea that this meeting was going to occur, so the destination was unclear at that point. When I arrived I could see the silhouette of Rotir and a much shorter figure standing to the left. They appeared to be standing quite a distance away. My attention was suddenly drawn to the outside of the giant energetic sphere we were in. I noticed other spheres of various sizes moving away from the Sunday. These spheres were more lit up than I had seen before from the perspective inside the sphere we were in. They seemed to be shimmering and then were becoming more translucent. They were moving towards the orbit of Venus and Earth in a slow steady fashion. I then looked over at our Sunday. The wall of the sphere I was inside was behaving like some sort of filter that altered the way we would normally view the Sunday. I perceived what appeared to be crackles of electricity radiating from the corona. My attention was then drawn back into the sphere where Rotir and another individual were now standing about 10 feet away from me. I greeted Tir and glanced over at the person standing next to him. They were looking back at me with some of the most compassionate eyes I have ever seen. The new person was about 5 foot 5 inches tall and wearing a shiny green robe and light brown sandals. His face had what appeared to be a mixture of ethnic features, including African characteristics. His eyes were brown, the same size as ours, and his hair had a salt and pepper appearance, with more black hair than white. His face looked like that of an older individual of his race, thanks to the appearance of wrinkles. His skin was about the color of those who live in North Africa at this time, except his skin also had a very slight orange tint to it. His head was of a slightly different shape than ours, more round, but overall he looked very human. I thought to myself, I wonder if this is how it felt when the Native Americans and Spaniards first saw one another. I noticed how long we had been standing in silence when he finally spoke. I am sure my jaw dropped when he addressed me in perfect English. I couldn't discern any accent at all. He called out to me by the name that the Blue Avians address me as. He introduced himself as Mika. He stated that his planet resides in our local star cluster and that his people are our stellar cousins, sharing about 94% of the same genetics. He claimed that he was an ambassador from his system of planets to Earth. Mika said his people have been enamored by our cultures and arts, but have always been disturbed by our capacity for violence. He further stated that his people had resided on Earth in the past as refugees during his own people's battle for freedom. He stated that it had only been a few generations since his people had overcome the tyrannical beings that had enslaved them. I asked Mika why he was speaking to me in English and not communicating non-verbally. He stated that he is perfectly capable of communicating non-verbally, but would rather speak in my native tongue. He then said his people have been combing through our radio, television, and internet data from their beginnings to get to know more about how our current society behaves and where we are on a consciousness level. Many of his people are now viewing our various forms of entertainment and delivery of information out of curiosity. He stated that many of his people were excited about the prospect of being able to come to Earth in the future to assist us, after we had obtained true sovereignty from the same beings that had enslaved them. Mika further stated that he had worked closely with Rotir during his own people's struggles, and that they had recently gone through a process very similar to what we are undergoing. He stated that his people didn't have as many challenges as are found on the Earth, but that there were numerous similarities. He said that if we were willing to accept it, their input would be highly valuable in the not-too-distant future. We spoke a little more about what his people would like to do alongside humanity in the future. Then he ended the conversation abruptly and bid me farewell. I was sort of taken aback by how quickly the conversation ended, and expected Rotir to then communicate. I then saw a blue orb come from behind them and zip directly to a point in front of my chest before rapidly taking me back to the bedroom. I have a feeling I haven't seen the last of Ambassador Mika. I then tried to go on with my normal schedule. I hadn't been able to talk with David since we were last in Boulder shooting Cosmic Disclosure in late June, and I had quite a lot going on up in my head. We were planning a family vacation to Long Beach which, I had hoped, would give us an opportunity to discuss recent events. David was caught up in a major physical and emotional house cleaning, with results that were ultimately positive, and our schedules did not converge. 6 days after the meeting with Mika, July 16, I had another blue orb show up in my room. I repeated the process and found myself again on a massive sphere standing in front of a silhouette of Ra-Tiri-Ir and smaller figures some distance away. Again I looked up at the overwhelming cosmic scene and witnessed a view that was similar to the time before. Once more I looked down and saw Ra-Tiri-Ir and another person standing before me. I then saw the silhouettes of Ra-Meri-Ir, Rorain-Ir, and a triangle-headed being standing off in the distance. I greeted Tiri-Ir and then focused on his companion. It took a moment for me to realize that the person standing before me was Gonzalez. I was shocked and admittedly a little nervous to see him. The last few times we met had not been very cordial at all. I had basically been handed off to the Wrangler. The last I had heard of Gonzalez was that he was off with the Mayan group receiving emotional healing. When I looked at his face to judge his disposition, I noticed that he didn't have his trademark scowl on his face, nor was he tightening up the tendons in his jaw repeatedly. His face was completely relaxed with no expression as he looked me up and down. He then got a huge smile on his face and asked me how I had been. After a short greeting, he explained that from his point of view and experience of time, he had been away for almost 6 months. He said that the technology from the Mayan breakaway group is simply magical. I kept thinking about how blissed out he was acting and the remarkable change in his overall energy. He stated that he now knew himself, and had found a real purpose in life. He said he had tried to find a purpose in the military by dedicating himself to the mission, and doing whatever was necessary to accomplish it. He had convinced himself that he was working for the greater good, and was in the end a service to others type of person. He had fallen into the lower density trap of egotism and of being self-absorbed. He and I had discussed how Tiri-Ir and Kari had asked me, once each, if I wanted to know who you were, who you are and who you will be. I had answered no on both occasions, as if something deep inside me was telling me that I should avoid this information. Kari even told me that the answers would change the nature of my personal relationships. I thought about my family, and have felt comfortable with that decision. When this occurred in my first meeting with Kari, she replied, "Stubbornness seems to follow you through all incarnations." Gonzalez said that his major breakthrough in his healing occurred when he answered yes to that same question when the Mayan group made the offer. He spent a little bit of time going into it, and encouraged me to do the same if the situation presented itself again. Gonzalez then got a serious look on his face and apologized for his recent behavior. He wanted to hear me say out loud that I forgave him, so of course I did. He seemed very relieved that I didn't harbor any resentment towards him. He then informed me that he had met with a few people in the SSP Alliance. He could not slide back into his old post after disappearing, but was able to remain in contact with certain assets. He was going to stay with the Mayan group and be a liaison of sorts between them and some other groups waiting to assist humanity. Gonzalez said he didn't have a whole lot of intel for me, but would expand on some earlier info that he had shared as well as offer an olive branch from the SSP Alliance. I had been in a deficit of fresh information for weeks, and was happy to hear what he had to say. He went on to talk about all of the activity going on in the Southern Hemisphere that has been reported by David Wilcock, Dr. Michael Salla and myself. He went into some of the details about the events that these Cabal factions are preparing for. Each faction has a slightly different view of what they are expecting to occur to our planet. Everyone is expecting that the sun is going to discharge a large amount of energy in all directions at once. Wilcock thoroughly explores the intel, Scientific and Spiritual Angles of This in the Ascension Mysteries, due out August 30th. I have been reading an advance copy and feel it is an immensely useful contribution to the overall discussion. Gonzalez said no one really knows what is going to happen when the expected solar event occurs. He said many of the elite believe that our star is about to do a reset of sorts. According to Gonzalez, this has occurred on a semi-regular basis, not only for our star but within our entire local star cluster for eons. The law of one perspective is that this is a natural event that promotes evolution and ascension throughout the universe on naturally repeating cycles of time. The most scientific and pragmatic of these secret syndicates believe the entire surface area of the Sun's corona is about to mass eject. They believe the Sun will then go almost completely dark for a number of days before it reawakens into a new state of equilibrium. These syndicate eggheads believe that the preceding energetic shockwave and the impact of this mega CME would take out all communications, electronics, and sources of electricity on Earth. This would have a negative impact on our current infrastructure but would effectively remove all traces of the AI threat from our solar system. It would also provide the perfect opportunity to declassify and disseminate technologies to the whole planet at once. Some of these syndicates further believe this will cause a flip in polarity of the Earth's magnetic field, having a dramatic effect on every living creature on the planet. The neurology and magnetic fields of our bodies would be affected as would our consciousness. There is a divergence between these various syndicates' beliefs as to how powerful of an effect this solar sneeze will have on the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth. Some believe that it will be a minor event that will take a few decades to recover from, while others are expecting dramatic increases in volcano eruptions and large-scale earthquakes across the world. This particular syndicate group believes it will cause a planetary winter that will repeat the downfall of the previous advanced civilization, which occurred just prior to our last ice age. In either case, each of these secret Earth syndicates expect to re-emerge after the dust settles and exert their control over the survivors. They believe after they bring order out of chaos, they will be gods who serve over a utopian NWO planet. Gonzalez saw the concerned look on my face, and said this event isn't imminent, and this is only what some of these syndicates are expecting. He said that the more esoteric of these syndicates believe, as many do in our community, that this will be a spiritual harvest. This is the perspective of the Law of One, which David has now been reporting on and investigating scientifically for 20 years. They think they can escape or hide from it while they are deep underground and beneath ice caps, such as in Antarctica. At this point I noticed that we were now standing closer to the other blue avians and the triangle head being. Gonzalez glanced at Tyr a couple of times, and then said he had to interrupt our conversation. A blue orb arrived. Gonzalez looked at me and said, I think Tyr wants to bend your ear until I get back. He turned towards the blue orb and was taken away. I looked up at Tyr and then glanced at the others. I had finally been able to read The Law of One, Book 1. Ever since I began to read the book in earnest, Tyr began to communicate with me in very similar wording and phrasing. I was now able to ask more questions and understand more of what was being communicated to me. I wondered what information I was about to receive in this latest communication. End Part 1. Thanks for listening and watching. Visit sbhirabayingalliance.com. Subscribe and share.